The Galactic Academy cafeteria was a place full of noise. Voices of many languages mixed together. The smell of food from hundreds of worlds filled the air. Tables were crowded with alien and human students talking, laughing, and sharing stories. But in one far corner, there was always an empty table. Only one person sat there. Princess Leora of the Illyrian Empire. She was tall and graceful, her silver-blue skin glowing softly under the white lights. Her long hair shimmered like strands of moonlight. She never spoke during lunch. She ate quietly, eyes lowered, as if she was lost in another world. Everyone noticed her, but no one dared to sit beside her. Some students said she was dangerous. Others said she thought she was better than everyone else. Some whispered about politics, that her family had enemies, and anyone who got close to her might get into trouble. Daniel Reeves, a young human engineer trainee, had heard all these rumors, but he didn't care much for gossip. His days were filled with fixing machines, repairing broken parts, and solving mechanical puzzles. He wasn't the type to be afraid of people because of stories. One afternoon, Daniel was in the cafeteria to fix a broken vending unit. He was on his knees with a toolkit, wires spread out in front of him when his eyes wandered to the far corner. There she was, Princess Leora, sitting alone, just as everyone always said. Daniel studied her for a moment. She wasn't looking around the room. She wasn't frowning or glaring. She was just quiet. When his work was done, he packed up his tools. He could have gone back to the table where his friends were waiting, but instead he walked to the empty corner. The room seemed to pause for a moment. A few students glanced up, whispering to each other. Daniel didn't ask if he could sit. He didn't bow or say anything at all. He simply placed his lunch tray on the table, sat down across from her, and started eating. Leora looked up from her plate, her silver-blue eyes meeting his for the first time. She didn't speak. She didn't seem angry. She just looked at him for a few seconds, then returned to her meal. Daniel didn't mind the silence. He had grown up in busy workshops where words were often replaced by the sound of tools and machines. Sometimes silence felt natural. The rest of lunch passed without a single word between them. Daniel finished his food, picked up his tray, and left without ceremony. The next day, it happened again. He walked into the cafeteria, saw the empty table, and went straight to it. This time, he sat beside her instead of across from her. Again, he said nothing. Again, she didn't send him away. By the third day, people were talking. Have you seen the human engineer sitting with the princess? What is he doing? Do you think they know each other? Daniel ignored the stares. He kept showing up, sometimes with a sandwich, sometimes with a bowl of stew, sometimes with half-finished gadgets that he tinkered with as he ate. One afternoon, while he was tightening screws on a small scanner, he noticed her watching his hands. Her gaze wasn't cold, it was curious. The scanner beeped, its display lighting up. Daniel set it aside and continued eating. The next day, something unusual happened. When Daniel arrived, Leora was holding her datapad. It was small, sleek, and clearly expensive. But the screen was dark. She hesitated, then slid it across the table toward him. Daniel took it without a word. He turned it over, removed the back cover, and saw the problem. A loose connection near the power unit. In less than a minute, it was fixed. The screen came to life. He slid it back to her. She looked at the working display, then at him. She gave a small nod. No smile, no words, but something in her eyes had changed. From then on, she often glanced at his work. She seemed interested in the way he used simple tools to repair complex things. She never asked questions, but Daniel could tell she was paying attention. The cafeteria still buzzed with whispers every time they sat together. But Daniel never explained himself, and Leora never offered an explanation either. One evening, Daniel left the cafeteria, His friend Rin caught up with him. "Why do you sit with her?" Rin asked. Daniel shrugged. "It's a good table. No one bothers me there." It was true, and yet it wasn't. The truth was harder to explain. He didn't see a princess who needed avoiding. He saw a person who was alone for no reason that made sense to him. And so the silent lunches continued. Weeks passed. The habit became part of the rhythm of their days. Daniel would arrive, set down his tray, maybe repair something while eating, and leave without. Unnecessary talk. Leora would eat quietly, sometimes glancing at what he was working on, sometimes lost in thought. There were no grand conversations, no dramatic moments. Just two people sharing a table while the rest of the cafeteria carried on around them. It wasn't friendship yet. But it was something. And in the quiet corner of the Galactic Academy cafeteria, something small and important had begun. The days at the Galactic Academy began to follow a quiet rhythm for Daniel Reeves and Princess Leora. Every midday, the same thing happened. Daniel walked into the cafeteria, sometimes with a tray of food, sometimes with a toolkit balanced in one hand. Leora was already there at her corner table. He would sit beside her without asking. She would acknowledge him with a small glance, then return to her quiet meal. Other students had stopped pretending not to notice. At first, they whispered in surprise. Now, their whispers carried curiosity. It was unusual enough for anyone to share a table with the alien princess, but for a human engineer trainee to do it daily, and without speaking much, made it stranger still. Daniel didn't care. The corner table had become his spot. The silence there didn't bother him. If anything, it helped him think. On one afternoon, while eating a bowl of vegetable stew, he pulled out a small device from his bag. It was a data scanner that needed calibration. He set it on the table, opened its casing, and began working with a miniature screwdriver. He noticed Leora watching him again, not in a way that demanded attention, but as if she was trying to understand what his hands were doing. Her silver-blue eyes followed each movement. The turn of a screw, the adjustment of a wire, the click of a panel closing. When the device beeped and lit up, Daniel set it aside and continued his lunch. Leora's gaze lingered on the scanner. For a moment before she went back to her own food. The next day, something changed. Daniel arrived to find Leora holding her personal datapad. She did not greet him, but as he sat down, she slowly slid the device across the table toward him. The screen was dark. Daniel picked it up. The casing was smooth and flawless, clearly a high-grade Illyrian model, more advanced than the Academy's. Standard tech. He turned it over, checked the power unit, and found the problem: a loose connection near the memory chip. It took him less than 2 minutes to fix. The screen lit up, showing the flowing silver script of the Illyrian language. He returned the datapad without a word. Leora looked at the glowing display, then at him. Her lips curved in the smallest possible nod. It was not thanks in words, but it was thanks all the same. From then on, the silent table began to fill with the soft sound of tools clicking. Daniel often worked on small gadgets during lunch. A broken comlink, a faulty drone sensor, a cooling fan from a lab machine. Leora sometimes brought her own things. Once it was a music player with distorted audio. Another time, it was a portable lens that wouldn't focus. Daniel repaired them all quickly, never asking how they broke or why she didn't take them to official tech services. It was a quiet exchange, her trust for his skill, his work for her silent approval. But outside the corner table, the whispers grew. Some students began to think Daniel was working for her as a personal mechanic. Others guessed they were forming some secret alliance. A few joked that Daniel was only sitting there to avoid sitting with anyone else. One afternoon, Rin, Daniel's friend from engineering class, decided to ask him directly. "Do you even talk to her?" Rin asked as they walked out of the cafeteria. "Not much," Daniel replied. Then why? She's not exactly known for opening up. Daniel thought for a moment. Because no one else does, and maybe someone should. It wasn't a big explanation, but it was enough for him. The days kept passing. The cafeteria was still loud, still full of life. But at the corner table, time seemed slower. Daniel and Leora never rushed through their meals. Sometimes they didn't even look at each other. But there was an ease now, the kind that came when silence stopped feeling empty. One day, the moment of change arrived quietly. Daniel was halfway through repairing a handheld hologram projector when a shadow fell over the table. It was a tall student from the Zathari species, known for their heavy armor-like skin. He placed a broken navigation device in front of Daniel. "Can you fix this?" the Zathari asked. Daniel was about to answer when Leora's gaze lifted. She looked at the Zathari calmly, then at Daniel. "He can," she said. It was the first time she had spoken to anyone else while Daniel was at the table. Her voice was soft but certain. The Zathari left the device with Daniel and walked away. Daniel repaired it quickly, returned it without fuss, and sat back down. He didn't mention the fact that Leora had spoken for him, but something about it stayed in his mind. That night, Daniel worked late in the engineering bay. The hum of machines filled the air. As he cleaned his tools, he found himself thinking about the way Leora had said those two words. He can. It wasn't a grand speech, but in a place where she rarely spoke at all, it meant something. The next day, Daniel brought an extra cup of sweet mineral tea from the vending unit. He set it on the table beside Leora's lunch tray without explanation. She glanced at it, then at him, and took a slow sip. She didn't thank him aloud. She didn't have to. In the corner of the cafeteria, between a human engineer and an alien princess, a bridge was being built. Not of words, but of small actions and shared space. And though most of the academy still didn't understand it, Daniel knew one thing. He would keep sitting at that table no matter what people said. The orbital station that held the Galactic Academy floated quietly above the green and blue planet below. Its walls were strong, its systems advanced, and its shield network kept it safe from the dangers of space. But on the 5th day of the lunar cycle, everything changed. Daniel Reeves was in the engineering lab, repairing a training drone's sensor array, when a sharp alarm cut through the air. The station's lights flickered. A red glow pulsed across the walls. "Warning," the automated voice said. "Meteor storm approaching. Orbital shield malfunction detected." Daniel's head snapped up. A meteor storm was bad enough. Small space rocks could tear through a station's hull if the shield failed. And if the main generators were offline, the shield was useless. He grabbed his toolkit and ran. Students were moving toward emergency shelters, but Daniel went the other way, straight to the engineering control room. The heavy doors slid open, and he froze for a moment. Princess Leora was already there. She stood at the central control panel, her long silver-blue hair falling over her shoulder as she worked the console. Her slender fingers moved quickly, entering commands in the flowing script of the Aelirian language. "You're not supposed to be here," Daniel said, stepping forward. "I was passing the monitoring station when the alarm triggered." She replied, without looking up. "I have training in power systems. I can help." Daniel blinked. He had never seen her in the engineering sector before. But there was no time to question it. He rushed to the side panel, pulling off a metal cover to reveal the tangled mess of wires inside. Sparks danced from a damaged conduit. The shield generator's primary circuit was overloaded. "We have 10 minutes at most," Daniel said. Leora moved to the opposite side, scanning readouts. "The backup generators are not starting." "That means we reroute manually," Daniel said, already digging through his kit for an insulated tool. The room was filled with the hum of machinery, the distant thud of meteors hitting the station's outer hull, and the faint vibration under their feet. Daniel worked fast, stripping damaged cables and replacing them with spares from his kit. Leora moved beside him, holding the new wires in place as he connected them. She didn't ask what he was doing. She just watched and copied his movements when needed. They spoke only when necessary. "Hand me the voltage regulator." Lower. The coolant flow by 20%. Check the second capacitor bank. Outside the viewing port, bright streaks of meteors burned against the darkness of space. A few struck the station's hull, making the walls shudder. Daniel's hands worked steadily despite the danger. He had been in risky repairs before, but never with someone else who matched his focus like this. Finally, Leora's voice broke the quiet. "You do not fear me." Daniel didn't look up. "Why would I?" Her eyes shifted toward him. "Others avoid me. They do not speak unless they must." "That's their problem," he said, tightening the final connection. "You're not someone to fear." There was no reply, but Daniel felt her gaze linger on him for a moment before she returned to her work. The last switch was thrown. A deep hum filled the room as the backup generators roared to life. A moment later, the main shield indicator flashed green. The orbital defense field reactivated just as a larger meteor passed dangerously close to the station, burning up in the barrier's energy glow. Daniel exhaled. "That's it. We're safe." Leora stepped back, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Well done." "You too," Daniel said. The alarm ended. The red lights faded back to white. Around them, the station's systems returned to normal operation. They stood in the quiet for a moment, the tension slowly fading. Then Leora spoke again. "You are different from the others," she said softly. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "In a good way, I hope." Her lips curved in the faintest trace of a smile. "Perhaps." Without another word, she turned and walked toward the door. But before leaving, she paused and glanced over her shoulder. "Tomorrow," she said, "you will still sit beside me?" Daniel didn't hesitate. "Yes." The door closed behind her, and he was left standing in the humming control room, feeling as if something important had just shifted between them. The next day in the cafeteria, things were the same. And not the same. They still sat in their corner. They still ate quietly. But now, every so often, Leora would look at him, and Daniel could see something new in her eyes. It wasn't trust yet, but it was the start of it. He didn't push her to talk. She didn't ask him for stories. But the silence felt warmer than before. And though no one else in the cafeteria knew it, Daniel and Leora had stood together under the shadow of a storm, and they had kept the station safe. It was only the beginning. The days after the meteor storm were quieter at the Galactic Academy, but for Daniel Reeves and Princess Leora, something had changed. Their silent lunches continued, but now there was a new weight in the air, a feeling that something important was waiting to be said or understood. One afternoon, Daniel was working on a small drone while sitting beside Leora. She watched him carefully, but her eyes looked distant, as if memories from far away were touching her thoughts. Daniel looked up from his work and glanced at her. "Leora," he said gently, using her name for the first time. "You don't talk much about yourself." She turned to him slowly, her eyes searching his. For a moment, she seemed unsure. Then she gave a quiet sigh. "My family," she said softly, "was once the rulers of the Illyrian Empire." Daniel nodded, remembering stories he had heard. The Illyrians were known for their wisdom and power, but also for many struggles with other factions. "But something happened," Daniel encouraged. She looked down at her hands. "A coup. A betrayal from those we called allies. My parents lost. The throne. Many were captured or worse." Daniel's heart tightened. "That must be hard," she nodded. "I was sent here, to the academy, to stay safe, to learn. But my heart is still with my people. My homeworld is in shadow." Daniel understood more than she said. You carry a heavy burden. Yes, she whispered. And because of that, I keep my distance. I don't want others to be caught, in danger because of me. Daniel paused, thinking about the silent lunches and the empty tables around her. So, you stayed alone to protect others? Leora met his eyes. Exactly. The cafeteria buzzed around them, students laughing, plates clinking, voices rising and falling. But here, in this quiet corner, two very different lives were beginning to connect. Daniel smiled softly. You don't have to be alone, she looked surprised. I don't know how to be different. It's simple, he said. Just sit, just share your time. No big talk needed. For a moment, Leora's face softened. You make it sound easy. Daniel shrugged. It doesn't have to be hard. Over the next days, their quiet bond grew stronger. Leora began to bring small things to the table. A new gadget she had found, a broken piece of tech she didn't understand. Daniel fixed them patiently, and sometimes they shared a brief smile or glance. One afternoon, Leora surprised Daniel by asking him a question. What made you sit with me the first day? Daniel thought for a moment. I don't know exactly. Maybe because you were sitting alone, and I knew what that felt like. She nodded slowly. I see, Daniel added. And maybe because I believe everyone deserves a friend. Leora's eyes shone with quiet gratitude. But the peace was fragile. The shadows of her past were never far away. Later that week, Daniel overheard a tense conversation in the hallway. Two Aelirian diplomats whispered about dangers lurking close to the academy, enemies who still sought to capture the princess and prevent her return to power. The news worried Daniel. He wondered if Leora knew, if she was prepared. When he saw her later, she was staring out of a window, lost in thought. He approached carefully. Is it true? Are you in danger? She turned to him, her face calm but tired. There are always threats, but the academy protects me. Daniel wasn't so sure. If they come here, you won't be alone. Leora gave a faint smile. Thank you, Daniel. That evening, Daniel lay in his quarters thinking about what he could do to help. He wasn't a warrior or a diplomat. He was just an engineer, but maybe that was enough. The next day, he brought a small device to the table, a personal alert system. This can warn you if someone is close, he explained. She studied it closely, then nodded. It is useful. More than the device, Daniel hoped his presence would be a shield of its own. Days passed. The academy remained peaceful, but the quiet fear lingered like a shadow behind every smile. One afternoon, as Daniel and Leora sat together, a message arrived on the station's communication system. It was from the Aelirian homeworld, a call for help and a plea for her return. Leora's eyes filled with tears she did not hide. Daniel reached out and placed a steady hand on hers. We will find a way, he promised. She squeezed his hand softly, the first real touch of comfort she had felt in a long time. That moment marked a turning point. The princess who once sat, alone now, allowed herself to lean on another. And Daniel, the quiet human engineer, became more than just a friend. He became a beacon of hope in the growing darkness. The Galactic Academy was preparing for one of the most important events of the year, a diplomatic summit that would bring together leaders and representatives from many different worlds. The atmosphere was tense but hopeful, as everyone wanted peace and strong alliances. Princess Leora, despite her usual quiet nature, was a key figure in the event. Many eyes watched her with respect and caution. The security team was extra vigilant. Daniel Reeves, the human engineer who had quietly become her companion, was close by. He moved calmly, observing everything with sharp eyes. That afternoon, the great hall filled with delegates and students. The large, transparent windows showed the distant stars and the green-blue planet far below. It was a perfect day, or so it seemed. Suddenly, alarms echoed throughout the station. Red warning lights flashed urgently. The crowd panicked, murmurs, turning to shouts. "Security breach," the automated voice announced. "Unauthorized personnel detected in the main hall." Chaos erupted as several figures dressed in dark uniforms and masks appeared. They moved fast and with purpose, carrying advanced weapons that glinted under the bright lights. Leora's eyes widened, but she stood tall. The intruders were clearly after her. Daniel's heart pounded, but his training and knowledge of the station kicked in. He knew the layout and possible escape routes better than anyone. The masked leader approached Leora and grabbed her arm firmly. "You are coming with us," he said sharply. Without hesitation, Daniel stepped forward. "Not if I can help it." The intruders turned to face him, weapons aimed directly at Daniel, but Daniel was ready. He reached into his bag and pulled out a small handheld device, a remote control he had designed for emergency situations. It could lock and unlock doors remotely. He pressed a button. The heavy docking bay doors slammed shut with a loud clang, sealing the intruders inside. They shouted angrily and tried to force the doors open, but the mechanisms were strong. Daniel took Leora's hand and said, "This way, quickly." He led her through narrow maintenance tunnels and service corridors that few people knew well. The air was cool and smelled faintly of metal and oil. Behind them, the sounds of shouting and alarms echoed through the station. The intruders were trapped, but not defeated. As they moved deeper into the tunnels, Daniel noticed one of the intruders had broken away from the group. The figure was moving fast toward the control room. "Wait here," Daniel whispered to Leora. He ran down a side passage and reached the control room just in time to see the intruder attempting to disable the station's security system. Daniel grabbed a sturdy metal pipe nearby and swung it with all his strength. The intruder fell unconscious. Daniel took a deep breath and returned to Leora, who was waiting calmly. "We have to get to the emergency shuttle bay," Daniel said. They hurried through the dim corridors, avoiding security cameras and patrols. At last, they arrived at the shuttle bay. Daniel immediately began activating the launch controls. The engines roared to life, filling the bay with deep vibrations. As the intruders arrived, they shouted in frustration and banged on the sealed doors. Daniel and Leora climbed into the shuttle and sealed the hatch. With a powerful thrust, the shuttle lifted off, shooting out into space, away from danger. For a few moments, silence filled the cabin. Then Leora turned to Daniel, her eyes shining. "You saved me," she said softly. Daniel shook his head. "We saved each other." She smiled faintly, a warm expression rarely seen on her face. "Why do you risk so much for me?" she asked. Daniel's voice was steady. "Because I believe in people, and I trust you." Leora looked down, then met his gaze again. "Thank you, Daniel." Outside, the station's security teams had regained control. The remaining intruders were captured and taken into custody. Though the crisis was over, Daniel and Leora knew that the threat was not gone forever. The princess could no longer hide behind silence and distance. The people she trusted could be counted on one hand. And Daniel knew he would stand by her side, no matter what challenges lay ahead. The once empty table in the cafeteria was now a place of courage and trust. Their silent bond had grown into something stronger. It was no longer just a quiet friendship. It was a promise.